everybody. This is Daniel from BrushymtnBeeFarm. We are all happy here that you're listening in as we dive into the mite problem that's plaguing our beehives. Throughout the course of the year, we all know that mite populations continue to multiply, and as they multiply, they're spreading the viruses, and that's becoming detrimental to our colonies. So if beekeepers don't act accordingly, then we're basically signing the death ticket for our hives coming winter. And ultimately, we need to know how we should be acting, what's the best management practices out there. And I would just like to introduce our guest panelist. She's an expert in this, Rebecca Masterman, and she's going to help us answer that question. Rebecca, she's worked for the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. She actually started working there back in the 1990s as an undergraduate, but later on she returned back to the Bee Squad in 2012 as the program director and coordinator. And in that position, she's worked very closely with Dr. Marla Spivak in her studies with honeybee hygienics behavior. And she's done some tremendous work in the research that she's been doing with honeybees, as well as what she's been pushing, and hopefully everybody's been listening to her push with mite monitoring. Rebecca and I basically, we first crossed paths when Brushy Mountain was introduced to this mite check kit that hopefully people have heard of, if not even used in their mite monitoring system. If you haven't used it, you definitely need to listen in, because this is a tool that will help beekeepers assess the mite levels easily. It's a great tool. We actually used it. We had our field day back in June, and we were able to use this and showcase it to a lot of beekeepers. Actually, I felt pretty good about our hives, because the first 2 hives that we monitored showed up with 1 or 2 mites per 300, which in that respect, we needed to treat come fall time. But one of the last hives that we actually monitored came back with 30 to 40 plus mites per 300 bees, which was extremely scary. And if you know the mite population, you know, they spread those viruses from bee to bee. So with that hive, it could have ultimately created a mite bomb, but we acted accordingly because we knew the information. So with that all being said, I do want to turn this over to Rebecca. And Rebecca, please enlighten us with all the information that you have.
Thank you. How much time does everybody have? Okay, I don't have that much information. Just kidding.
Well,
Daniel, I have
Rebecca,
to ask first. I'm going to interrupt. Can you see the entire slideshow, or are you just seeing a setup screen?
So I am seeing a setup screen.
Okay.
If anybody would like to chat in. Before we start with your presentation, though, I do want to send out a poll to the audience just to see how many people are monitoring either using powdered sugar or alcohol wash. So if the listening audience could please answer this question, we would greatly appreciate it. And I will give everybody 5 minutes to answer.
Great. And then should I get started here?
Well, let's see how the poll turns out. Are you able to see the poll results?
Okay. Let's see. Poll open.
Yeah, let's give them a couple more minutes just to see.
Okay. Very good. So have you gone back and tested that colony again that had the high mite levels, Daniel?
So this is basically my methodology. I like to assess my hives before I apply a treatment. And then once I apply a treatment, then I go back and then assess the hives again. And so with that colony that had the 30 to 40, yes, we went in. And as you know, most of the treatments out there, I guess the softer chemicals, I should say, is what I usually go with, and they have a temperature range.
Right.
So I had to choose the one that was appropriate for the temperature out there. But I did apply it. Then I went back in and I monitored again, and huge, significant difference, not only in the mite levels that I monitored, but just the overall general health of the hive.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and close the poll, and it should come up with the results for you. Well, Rebecca, do you see the results?
Is it 96%? Is that what I'm
So
seeing?
86% voted.
Oh, okay.
The scary part here is, well, the good part is 41% monitored for powdered sugar, 9% used alcohol wash, 21% monitored with other methods.
Okay.
But this bottom one, 29% did not monitor mite levels.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Maybe we'll change a few minds here. How's that? We'll see if I can present a convincing argument why monitoring for Varroa can actually make a difference in the health of the colonies. So thanks everybody for participating in that poll. Are you ready for me to begin?
Yes, you have the screen and the floor, so please go ahead.
Thanks so much. Welcome everybody, and thanks very much to Brushy Mountain and Daniel for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I am in Minnesota, so I thought I'd share a picture of actually which room I'm in. If you look at our brand new bee and pollinator research lab, I am in that area that juts off in that conference room giving you my presentation. So I'm pretending like you're all in front of me, and really excited to talk to you about Varroa. I'm going to give you a little background about what I'm doing and why I'm so passionate about that little mite. We are in an area with lots of beekeepers, and beekeeping is very popular, and bees are very popular. So the Bee Squad was started in order to support both beekeepers, but also to give the public some ways to help us out and help promote bee health. So I have a team of, I have trouble counting sometimes, but I think there's somewhere around 24 different paid team members, not all of them full-time, most of them part-time, but all of these team members are very passionate and they're very talented in a lot of different ways, and we like to make sure we do what we can to keep bees healthy. And we have a lot of different programs, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about Mite Check and those Mite Check kits, the Varroa mite testing kits, and also about some of the work we're doing. This is just a preview, excuse me, about what Mite Check looks like earlier this year. And so I'm jumping right into it, and just to get you thinking about how we can make this map better. This is our idea of going ahead and monitoring for Varroa and having beekeepers report their numbers at a county level. So it doesn't share the location data, but I'm going to talk more in detail later on about this project and about how we're going to ask you to participate. But it gives us some good information about the mite counts and then what people are doing after their sampling. And again, it's all anonymous, so we're not going to report you to your neighbors if you have high mite counts. And if anything, I'd like to share with you today, as Daniel did, is that those high mite counts are really something that we all experience, and especially if our colonies are close to other colonies. If you are keeping bees on an island, then you probably don't have the problem, which is kind of nice. Depends on the size of your island, actually. But we also have mentoring apiary classes here where we're doing a lot of hands-on instruction. And one of the reasons why we developed the Mite Check kit or the Varroa mite testing kit is because our beekeepers, they were training to be very good beekeepers, but they reported to us that they just couldn't quite get that kit put together in order to do some powdered sugar roll sampling. So that's why we put our kit together for them. Another program that we have that I have to bring up before I talk too much is called Hive to Bottle. I mentioned that we are really trying to get the public on board and help us keep bees healthy. And so with this program, we keep bees for not just families in their backyards, but they also corporations and different organizations pay us to manage colonies. So you see on the left here, colonies at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. You can see our pretty Minneapolis skyline in the background, just right off the rooftop. And then on the right, you can actually see 3M's colony, one of 3M's colonies. We keep bees for that organization. And because we are keeping bees at many different apiaries, we're also able to collect colony health data. And this is really the program that led me to understand just how serious the Varroa problem was here at Minneapolis-St. Paul, where we have lots of beekeepers and lots of hives. And we've also identified queen issues, resource shortages, and entombed pollen issues, and when robbing occurs, and really what robbing can do to colonies in an area with a lot of different bees living. So from that program, though, we understand that there are many different issues that are impacting the honeybee health. And I don't know if you've seen this. This is actually a diagram that my boss, Dr. Marla Spivak, designed. And what your first takeaway should be is that, wow, this honeybee health thing is pretty complicated, because it is. It is a number of different problems that the bees can have. And on the left side in red, we now have Varroa, because we really feel like we've got this epidemic where the Varroa mite are really not the pests that they used to be. In 1990, let's see, I started keeping bees in 92 actually, and at that point, Varroa were around, and they could really be detrimental to a colony, but that's shifted dramatically, and it's because of the fact that the Varroa are now vectoring viruses and other pathogens, and that is a game changer. So that means that where it used to be a brand new colony, package colony put on foundation, you could wait the first year and not even look for those mites. And now you have to get in there, and in our experience, and beekeeping is very local, but in our experience, our brand new colonies are actually definitely threatened by Varroa, and I've seen colonies die the first year because they had a very high Varroa infestation. But the truth of the matter is that even a low Varroa infestation can start to transmit those pathogens. And then on the flip side, there are environmental issues that the bees are facing. We've got pesticide issues and a lack of flowers. And in the middle and connecting everything is nutrition. And so I'm going to speak up a little bit about nutrition, but whenever we talk about bee health, even if we're really focused on Varroa, we need to bring it back to the fact that nutrition is key, and it is our job as beekeepers to make sure we are addressing that issue with our bees and making sure that they're not being stressed because of a lack of nutrition. So what do we see here, and what do kind of my colleagues that I collaborate with across the country, what do we see that's driving the current honeybee health crisis? I hope at least one person is laughing. That would make me really happy, because my graphic designer is horrified that I put this together myself. But we really see Varroa driving the bus in the colonies that we manage. And because we manage a number of colonies across a wide geographic area, and because I've got very well-trained beekeepers going in and collecting colony health data, we're able to see that when our colonies are challenged, it's actually very rarely that it's a pesticide issue, but what we're seeing is that monitoring and managing Varroa is the key to keeping our bees healthy. And I need to tell you that we have a philosophy here at the University of Minnesota. We have the luxury to be able to be able to say in the Bee Squad program that we are only going to use organic miticides. Some people, if you are listening and you have weather that is a little bit more challenging than ours, then and the temperatures are a lot hotter, then you might not have that luxury. So I mentioned earlier, and I think that we need to really keep that in our minds, that beekeeping is very local. So if I give you, and you are not in Minnesota, excuse me, if I give you what we do to take care of Varroa, it's probably not going to work for you if you're not in a northern climate. But our philosophy really is that we want to not put anything into those colonies. And I'm going to give you a resource that has this spelled out. But our goal is to not use antibiotics or treatments. But we also recognize that because we are in this mite epidemic, we do need to intervene when we look at the health of colonies we're managing. So a note to all of you, your bees do have Varroa, and I like to tell people they're this big. But as I mentioned, managing the mites is important to where we are, and we have seen our colonies just thrive when we try to make sure that they're not really being challenged by the pathogens that the Varroa vector. And so I hate to tell you, but when you say what should you do to manage mites in your colonies, we don't know. We don't know because we don't know what your colonies look like. And mite management is dependent on several factors. So time of year is important, the amount of brood you have in your colony, your outside temperatures, the size of your colony, your mite levels. If you're not finding mites, then I'm not going to tell you to intervene unless you live in an area where you know that you're under a lot of mite pressure from your neighbors. Also, you have to look and see if what you're putting in the colony, if you decide to use a chemical, you need to make sure that it's safe for that honey that you've got in your supers. And the end question about what should you do to manage mites in your colonies is that you need to have a management strategy. And unfortunately, I wish I could just tell you this is your management strategy. If you live here, follow this. But what we have seen through that Hive to Bottle program, where we are the beekeepers for a number of colonies across a geographic area, we have found that the only thing that we can do to stay ahead of the mite problem is just to be vigilant and monitor and intervene if it's called for. And again, it sounds like it's an aggressive management strategy, and we really are looking for the day where we don't have to intervene as much. And I'll tell you that if I was standing here a year ago, I would have told you that, you know, all of our colonies had received a mite treatment already in the year, and now we are just starting to manage because we've actually seen a lot fewer mites in our colonies. But what that tells me, it doesn't tell me that we're done with the problem. It tells me that these mite populations are probably shifting, and we're probably going to have some years where they're very high and some years where they're not as high. And so we're in a year that it's a little bit more comfortable, but it doesn't mean we should let our guard down. So your management strategy, I hope that if you take away anything from this evening's discussion, that you decide that you do need to have a plan. A plan is very helpful. As I hinted to earlier, Varroa are, they're problematic enough if they're not vectoring anything. They can reduce the lifespan of adult bees, and they can compromise the immune system of bees, and eventually it can lead to a colony collapse in the late fall, early winter. But Varroa as a virus and the virus complex, that packs a different punch. It also it has an issue with the immune system of the bees, and it also increases your bee's susceptibility to other diseases and to pesticides. And this is one of the things that we found a couple of years ago when we were really confused about the health of the colonies. But sometimes the colonies were even brand new colonies that should have been otherwise healthy. They were so affected by Varroa early or mid-season that they didn't make it to to even get to the point where we could see if they would winter. So Varroa are actually causing a lot of beekeepers to lose colonies throughout the season, and that's something important to understand. So in '87, I don't know, I should have asked Daniel to have you raise your hands. Who kept bees before Varroa, which I call the good old days? Even early on in Varroa, it was a lot different. They were first discovered in Florida and in Wisconsin, so close to where I am right now in Wisconsin. And at that point, there was only one approved treatment for Varroa, and it was a synthetic miticide. So that's the good news, in that we've got a lot of different things that we can use to impact the Varroa populations now. The mite transmission, though, is an issue as far as having the mites move from colony to colony. And back in the day when Varroa was introduced, we weren't as aware of that being the problem. We really thought about Varroa as the regular population growth within a colony. But studies have come out recently that have really shown that it's a little different. And the Varroa population models don't explain what's going on actually in the colony, because there are some spikes in the Varroa populations that really can only be explained by the invasion of mites from other colonies. Now that's a game changer, because that takes Varroa management out of your control, doesn't it? It means that if you are an amazing beekeeper and you do all of these great cultural controls where you are controlling the levels of Varroa and you are on top of it, well, if you're keeping your Varroa down in the population levels but your neighbor isn't, there are data that show that that could be a problem, and you could actually get Varroa from your neighbor. And the studies are still being done, but a couple are suggesting that it could be a 1 to 2 mile radius. And also, we know an interesting bit about Varroa, that when the Varroa levels are lower, 0 to 12 mites per 100 bees, well, 12 is pretty high, but Varroa, they prefer nurse bees. But after that, if there are over 13 mites per 100 bees, then the chemical profiles of the nurses and foragers, they overlap, and the Varroa doesn't have a preference between them. And so Varroa are going to be found both on the nurse bees and on the foragers. But what we learned from that little bit of research is that you should take your sample from the brood nest. I've seen people who are really worried about sampling the queen, and I understand that. But if you're sampling just from a honey frame, you're a lot less likely to actually be where the Varroa are, because they're not as attracted to those bees until you have a high enough level of mites where they might be not have a preference for nurse bees versus other bees. So, as I hinted at, or actually I think I just said it, how you manage your Varroa populations, they can actually impact honeybee colonies in your area. So it becomes a little bit about, you want to become a good beekeeper neighbor to the other apiaries in a closer proximity to you, 1 or 2 miles, because honeybees that are collapsing from mite infestations, they could be a source of mites transferring to healthy colonies. Now I wish I could see your faces, because what I tell people here, if I'm in person, is I tell them that what this really means is that you, well, one, it's relieving you of all of the responsibility, because of course you have Varroa in your colony, not because of your management, because of your neighbors. So I'm smiling right now, but I think that we really need to move on from being afraid to tell people that we find Varroa in our colony. I think that some of the data out there are really showing that Varroa are everywhere, and they can grow to high numbers in your colony regardless of your management strategy. That's why your management strategy has to include monitoring. So I try to give people kind of a get out of bad beekeeper reputation free card. I just made that up. But I'm trying to make sure that people understand that, you know, beekeeping is really hard, and monitoring for mites is just adding one more job that's very important. But if we do have colonies where mites are allowed to really reproduce, then the sick bees with the mites and viruses, they can abandon the colony and enter other colonies. And so if you are in an area where you have a very dense population of bees, your Varroa problem or their Varroa problem can become everybody's problem within about a mile of you. Do you recognize these mites? These are the mites that were on the bus. So again, my graphic designer did not do that. I have to tell people that. So Death by Varroa. One of the issues right now is that it's hard to know what death by Varroa looks like. It confuses beekeepers, and it should, because it's really a newer thing that I think that those of us in Extension, we've just begun to realize that this information needs to be kind of wrapped up nicely and shared. And one of my favorite bee scientists, Megan Milbrath at Michigan State University, wrote a very good article. And I've copied her reference in here on this slide, Megan Milbrath, and I'm just going to sum it up for you. But she wrote an excellent article a couple years ago, and it was also a blog and Be Informed, and it talks about what it looks like when a colony dies from Varroa. And this is overwintered, but it really can be any time of the year. And really, the first sign is that the colony was actually really big and it looked really healthy in the fall, and that you find a lot of honey left in those top boxes. But now, if alive, the cluster is really small and maybe the size of a softball, and there are hardly any bees left on the bottom board. And near or below the cluster, if it's still there, is a patch of spotty brood, some fully capped, some with bees dying upon emergence, and heads facing out, tongue sticking out. And if you look closely in the cells in the brood, around the brood area, you're going to see white crystals stuck to those cell walls, looking like somebody sprinkled salt in the nest. And then the other sign is that you didn't have records showing that your Varroa mites were under control. And I'm just going to put here, this isn't even fair, because it used to be, in Minnesota at least, that if you checked your mite levels end of August, early September, and you intervened if necessary and checked again and they were good, that meant that you did everything that you needed to do. But through that Hive to Bottle program I mentioned and our monitoring of those colonies, we learned that that's not the case anymore, that we had to check those colonies again in October, which is actually getting to be kind of late in Minnesota for bee work. And so we have started monitoring all the way through October, and I'm guessing, since you're likely in a state that's a little bit warmer than where we are, that your parameters might have changed too. And so as long as you can get into those colonies and monitor, it actually can really make a difference as far as keeping those bees alive. So some photos to go with what we call parasitic mite syndrome, or dying from Varroa. You're going to see brood that's been chewed out, and you can see a close-up here. The bees start removing it. You're going to see uncapped cells. You're going to see some frass. Here's a picture that circles the frass in the cells, and that's something that they're actually easier to see. It's easier to see mite frass than it is to see eggs in the colony, I think. So it's just something that we need to all start checking. If a colony dies, I can usually tell and walk somebody through it on the phone, and they go back and they look and they say, yep, that's what it was. So the other thing that you might see if the colony is alive, and I just got an email today from a beekeeper who reported deformed wing virus in his colony. So now's the time we really need to be aware of making sure that these bees are looking good and they're healthy. Deformed wing virus is vectored by Varroa, and he asked me, what should I do? What can I do? He told me that he put a treatment in for mites, but he's still seeing the bees. And really the only thing you can do for deformed wing virus is just intercept the vector, which means go ahead and you've got to make sure that that mite level that allowed for the virus to be vectored is managed. So a little bit about the road to mite check and these mite check kits. So we're going to move on and just talk about one of the reasons why we really think it's important that everybody's on board, at least for monitoring, and then figuring out how you can manage your mites. But monitoring is kind of the first step, because monitoring is going to give you that information so you can at least understand why your bees are healthy or not healthy. You can see this is a couple years old data, but a similar thing happens every year where we have much higher levels of colony loss, total annual loss, than what we think is acceptable. So the Bee Squad found some friends. I've already mentioned Michigan State, Megan Milbrath, but also the Be Informed Partnership and Dennis Van Engelsdorf and his team at the University of Maryland. And honestly, they've been amazing to work with, because we've really developed a program where we think we are putting up a platform where if beekeepers, it's really beekeeper citizen science, and if beekeepers work together, we can at least get the awareness out there, and then once this infrastructure is set up, it actually gives researchers and epidemiologists a lot of excitement, because there's a great way to be able to actually track, to do research and collect these data that beekeepers are providing, and to learn from the information. So the two things, the Mite Check testing kit, or we also call it the Varroa Mite testing kit, and also Mite Check, and I introduced that early on. But the powdered sugar roll test kit for backyard beekeepers, although to tell you the truth, I've talked to commercial beekeepers who really like their crew to have a test kit handy, because it's a simple test, and it can give you a lot of information quickly, as Daniel was mentioning. So the powdered sugar roll test, it's the reason why we picked it is, first, it's actually very effective. It is the gold standard in testing for mites is actually alcohol, and good for you, the people in the audience who are actually using the alcohol wash. That's the gold standard, and it's a great way to test. That scares people. It scares a lot of beekeepers, and I understand why it scares you, because I've never seen the bees bounce back from that. You're not hurting the colony when you're just taking that 300 bee sample, but I think that somebody, I think I can hear you say, but what about the queen? So yes, you could possibly sample the queen. I've heard reports that she can make it through a powdered sugar test, but she can't make it through an alcohol test. But we're strong advocates of the alcohol wash, but the powdered sugar roll test, we really like it because it is effective, and it is a way for beekeepers to have a easy read on what their mite levels are. And I'll also tell you, I'll warn you that the first couple times you do it, it's hard. It's not easy, but once you practice, you can actually get really good at it. The powdered sugar roll test kits that we put together, we actually put them together, as I mentioned, because our beekeepers that we were doing the hands-on training with just said it was a barrier to them treating. And so we put them together, and thank you to Brushy Mountain Bees for selling them. And we're really excited about the fact that the test kits are actually supporting that Mite Check project. We've submitted a couple grants for Mite Check, and we're really hoping to get more support for it. But right now, Mite Check is fueled by the sales of our test kits. So, okay, a couple of things here. I think that Daniel told me that he shared the video of a couple of videos of us doing this test. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on this page, but for those of you who are not familiar with this, it's actually on our website. This PDF is, and so you can get a sense of it there. And there's more information that I'll share later if you do want to make your own kit. But otherwise, this kit is a way to go ahead and sample the bees and hopefully not find this many mites. But this does happen, and I will tell you that my team members, when they find the number of mites here, then they'll look up the previous test and how many mites the colony had, and more times than often, this is a huge shock, and it means that something happened where Varroa were able to move into the colony when they test like this. This is a serious problem if a colony has this many mites and is not treated. If it's treated immediately, that actually it can definitely save the colony. But if left untreated, that's a problem. So just to summarize why the powdered sugar test, it's a non-destructive sample. It's a reliable measure of mites on adult bees. And what we're worried about with the sticky board is that it might not give the results of a spiking mite population as fast as a powdered sugar roll test. So I'm just going to go back. So when we see these high levels of mites in the powdered sugar roll test, often the sample before was very low, and so we don't have the data yet. But I worry about sticky boards as far as being able to detect these high mite levels, and so that you can intervene prior to harm being done to the bees. So why do we care about this? that's actually, there's a typo in the slide, sorry to point it out, but why do we care about monitoring management of Varroa? And really the truth is, we care because we know that the data show in one apiary, if there's a mite problem, it can end up impacting another apiary. So then comes Mite Check, and this I mentioned it's actually being done with the University of Maryland, Michigan State, and as well as BeeFarm partnership. But we're really trying to get the beekeepers, all of you out there, to get good at mite monitoring so that you can take control of the mite problem. And we also want you to share information about your mite levels so that other beekeepers can look and say, oh wow, look at it's green, and then which means low, or oh wow, look at that, it's red, so maybe I should get in there and take a look. And then last, I've also mentioned earlier that those late season mite populations, we need more information about them. How are the mites spreading? There are some initial studies that have been done, but there's a lot that we need to fill in the blanks. So hopefully we can give that information back to beekeepers. So the Mite Check survey is us asking beekeepers to actually monitor for mites monthly, report the results to mitecheck.com, and then be able to view those mite levels from across the country and locally. So this is the map of after last year. And you can see, I always have to tell people, it looks like the height of the mite problem is in Michigan and in Minnesota, and we're causing problems for everybody else. But it's really because we just have more monitoring in our home state of Minnesota and Michigan, where this project is located. But we're really hoping that this map eventually will be filled with information, and right now it's pretty basic and just meant to give you the initial tools of being able to share your information so you can maybe help beekeepers in your area, and also use it as a warning, early detection warning system. And also in the future, we're hoping to refine it and give beekeepers a lot more information about what's going on with mite populations. So we all had to agree what the mite numbers meant. And remember, we're using the powdered sugar and the alcohol washes. And here's what we agreed on. And I'm going to say this again, beekeeping is very, very local. There are areas where if you have mites, they might not have the viruses or pathogens that we have in our area. And so it's important to understand that, and it's important to understand that those of us who are trying to figure all of this out and share good information, we understand that too. But we do see the mite problem as very problematic. And but at 0 to 3 mites per 100 bees, it's really good to just keep monitoring and managing using some good cultural controls. At a level of 4 to 5, intervention using a miticide will likely greatly increase the colony chances of survival, and colony loss or damage is very likely when the mite levels are sustained at higher numbers, like 6 to 11 per 100 bees, and at 11 plus, the loss of colony is likely if gone unmanaged. And there are data that support even lower mite intervention management thresholds out there, and so that's one of the reasons why earlier I said, what do you do to take care of the Varroa problem? And that's why I really do stress that you need to come up with a management strategy, and it doesn't even, you don't have to work alone if you have a beekeeping organization or you create a group of beekeepers. You can start to get that information, and you can figure out that maybe you don't have to treat at such low levels, or maybe you have to treat at low levels. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, we have a lot of mites. I told you we have been a good year this year, but we have a lot of beekeepers, and so we can't breed resistant mites when we keep bringing in new populations, and unless you live on an island, it's really hard to do that. So we have a persistent mite problem. here. So when should you test for mites? We recommend monthly testing from the spring until the fall, the late fall. And because of the fact that that consistent monitoring will give you that option to address a spiking mite population. And also, watch for those late summer, fall population spikes. And it's important that you're monitoring your mite levels, you're managing your mites based on those test results, and then you're going back in there and you're monitoring your mite levels after management to measure the efficacy of your strategy. So not all strategies work, and sometimes it's really just dependent. The weather might have intervened and made your miticide less effective, or sometimes maybe your mite population is too high for one of the other ways to control. But regular divides, drone brood removal, brood interruption, requeening with a different genetic line, keeping your bees, that's my island, in an isolated area. Miticides are all different ways to manage Varroa. I mentioned that I was going to go back to nutrition, and I will. Nutrition is key. Your bees need nectar, they need honey, they need pollen. The winter bees need really good pollen sources, and research has been done to show that the most important predictor of colony wintering in a study done in North Dakota by a University of Minnesota PhD student showed that pollen predicted that. So the availability of pollen for your bees was key, or for those bees, it was key to survival, which makes sense because the bees need access to that protein in order to raise great, healthy winter bees. So feed your bees if necessary. It's something that we also make sure that we tell people that organic sugar, they actually can't digest it. So if you need to feed your bees syrup, make sure that it's just refined sugar, and feed them pollen supplement. That's our recommendation. But what a better way to feed your bees than to get everybody to plant flowers for your bees. As beekeepers, you are in this unique position that people, one, you're just cool because you keep bees, and people want to talk to you about it. And so take that opportunity to ask your neighbors. If you own a business, ask your customers, people you work with, schools, cities, states, anybody who's going to listen to you, ask them to put some bee food in the ground. That's a local question too, but if you get a good resource to find what is good for bees in your area, and then encourage people to put that in the ground and help your bees, I think that's really important. And then it's really important that if you put bee food out there, that you make sure it doesn't have any pesticides in it. When we say pesticides, we actually mean, we need insecticides, we mean miticides and fungicides. Entombed pollen, I mentioned earlier, is related to a fungicide in the pollen. So it's something that that is an important part of that message. So I'm going to wrap up though and talk about something that you can do and you can become a part of, and I really hope that you do. Mite-a-thon, a pollinator partnership, they recognized that we had Mite Check going, and we were encouraging beekeepers to report their numbers, and they are taking the initiative to bring a lot of different groups together. So it's a national effort. It's actually bigger than a national effort because they're involving Canada and Mexico. And so it's a North American effort to have beekeepers monitor for Varroa and then put those data into mitecheck.com. So we really want to see that map lit up. Hopefully it's all green because everybody has low mite numbers, but we're really excited to see that result. And put it in your calendar. It doesn't mean that I want you to wait until September 9th to go and monitor, but the whole week of September 9th, that's the week where we're trying to get everybody in North America who has a colony of bees to go ahead and go and monitor their mite levels, and then enter those mite level data into mitecheck.com. Now, you don't want to just do it that week for a couple of reasons. Now is a key time to making sure that your mite levels are in check, and so make sure that I'm sure a lot of you are already doing it right now, but go ahead and check your bees for mites now. It's good practice if you haven't done a lot of testing, so it's really good practice. So go ahead and try now, and then I really encourage you to join us in September. Mite-a-thon is supported by a lot of different organizations, and I had to actually put this on 2 different sites, but the Honey Producers, also Bee-Informed Partnership, USDA, Pollinator Partnership, University of Maryland, the American Beekeeping Federation, Michigan State, the Healthy Bee Honey, the Honeybee Health Coalition, University of Minnesota, the Canadian Honey Council, and then it's sponsored by Valmont and California Almonds, as well as Project Apis M. So, resources. I promised I would share resources, and then I have time to answer questions if you have them. One, our manual, and our disease and pest manual is free on our B-Lab website, but I'm going to warn you, I'm in Minnesota, so our management is very different, but it wouldn't hurt you to go ahead and you can go to blab.umn.edu, and that's on another slide a little bit later, but you can go there, and right on our front page, you can just take a look at that manual. Our philosophy is in there if you're interested in seeing that, as far as our management philosophy. But the Honeybee Health Coalition is hands down, from what I've seen, the best place for looking at Varroa mite information as far as what your choices are for intervention, efficacy, time of year. So all of those different parameters that I mentioned that unfortunately you need to be on top of when you're monitoring and managing for mites, when you're doing an intervention, that information is laid out very nicely. I am not going to tell you that it's easy, because it is not, and I'm sorry, and I wish it was, but this is a very good resource for, they spent a lot of time putting this information together, and it has organic miticide information as well as synthetic miticides, and it also talks, there's information just about application, but really just more about Varroa, which that's always good to be armed with that information. And then more information about Mite-a-thon. You can go to the Mite-a-thon website, and you can actually sign up to be notified. We're really encouraging beekeeping organizations to do this as a group, to encourage your members. If you're not a part of an organization, you are absolutely, we encourage you to be a part of this too. Your data can make a big difference, and I'm going to be very disappointed if I don't have, let's see, all 252 of you have data points on the week of September 9th. So the Bee Squad is supported by a lot of different organizations, grants, as well as University of Minnesota Extension, and so I'll just mention that really quickly. Also customer-generated support, which is revenue, which is makes a big difference in our operation. And then, as I promised, our B-Lab website is there. The Bee Squad, I put the Bee Squad email address there. If you have questions, if you send that questions there, I will get that email. So I'm happy to answer questions now or later. And thank you very much for those of you who stuck through this webinar. Really excited to share that information with you.
And we thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy, hectic schedule to join us and give us all this excellent information. The thing that I wanted to reiterate basically was you brought up 2 maps. You brought up the Bee-Informed Partnership map, and you brought up the Mite Check map. And, you know, we always get the questions of, you know, well, how can beekeepers help these researchers out? And if we do help out, what do we get out of it? Those right there, those 2 maps show what the data that we're presenting to the researchers, whether it's Mite Check or BIP, the return on that, the information there is excellent. We're able to make better management decisions. We're able to see what's happening across the United States, even up into Canada and down into Mexico. So please, you know, I can't emphasize this enough. Take the time, go to mitecheck.com, or was it mitecheck.org?
It's mitecheck.com. Yep.
Mitecheck.com. Okay. Go to the Bee-Informed Partnership. figure out how you can contribute. There's the Mite Check. Obviously, you input the data there. BIP, they have a survey that they have in April, and all that information is gathered, put together, and presented to us beekeepers so that we can better manage our colonies. And Rebecca, just again, another thank you for taking the time to give us all this information. It was great. We've got a lot of questions. I think you've mentioned a couple things that people were curious about. One of them being the use of organic sugar. You mentioned that. Go ahead.
So organic sugar, and I credit Aveda because we keep bees for Aveda, and they really wanted to use organic sugar, and so we searched high and low for a refined organic sugar, and it turns out that if you refine sugar, it is no longer organic, but the bees actually can't break it down. There's molasses in organic sugar, and they can't break it down, and so they don't have those digestive enzymes to use it, and so it just makes it harder for them if you use it.
Okay. So another thing that we constantly get bombarded with is, why even do these mite checks? Why not treat prophylactically? And the mites are there. Just apply treatments. What's your suggestion as far as why beekeepers should be monitoring for mites?
Right, that's a great question. And honestly, it used to be that the formula for keeping bees involved a treatment here and a treatment there and give them this and they're good to go. Now we know part of our philosophy here is we don't want to put anything on the colony if they don't need it. So even though it's an organic miticide, and even though I strongly believe that the bees are much better with it if they have the mites, I also believe that if they don't need to have something put into the colony, then we shouldn't do it. And so it's a matter of it's precision beekeeping. We need to make sure that if we're doing a serious intervention like a miticide, that those bees need it, and if they don't, then let's just let the bees keep doing what they need to do to get healthy and get good nutrition, so that they can be prepared once if they do get an infestation. So really, treating a colony if they don't have it is a little bit stressful for them. But then the problem is that what happens when if you just think that the problem's taken care of, but it turns out that a colony potentially, close by to your apiary might have collapsed, and those bees might have found their way into your just treated colony. Your mite treatment doesn't help once that efficacy is through. So if those bees enter that colony right after you manage them, then the problem is that you're not going to be able to maybe know that your bees are challenged, and because you're not monitoring regularly. If that makes sense.
Okay. It does make sense, yes. Because any intervention, ultimately anything that you put into the hive that's not necessarily natural to the hive does have an impact on your bees. And if you can go without doing that by knowing your mite levels, knowing when you need to treat, yes, I agree 100%. And not only that part to it, but when you do actually go in and treat, understanding the efficacy of your treatment, because you may apply a miticide now, but 2 weeks later, the health of your colony is continuing to decrease, and you don't know if your treatment was effective or not. So definitely doing a treatment and then monitoring after your treatment to understand what's going on with your hive as well.
Right.
So I just want to make note out to the listening audience. A lot of people are asking about what miticides, what's the best miticide, what's the efficacy of miticides. All of that is, and again, this is my point of view. You can chime in if you want to, but I think you did chime in. You said that your philosophy for all that was on your website. So if they want to read about it, they can go there. But my philosophy is do whatever is working in your area. You might have, it's that you ask one question to 10 beekeepers and you get 15 different answers. You know, what works for me may not work for you. And also, again, going back to that monitoring, knowing that if it's effective or not, because there are miticides out there, hopefully not a lot, but there are some out there that might have built up resistance towards. So alternating your treatments as well is a good management practice there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the investment into the mite management strategy and being prepared. It's a lot easier if you know, based on the conditions, what you plan to use, instead of doing a test and finding high mites, or if you're finding mites on your bees just by looking at them. It's not a good way to actually monitor for mites. But if you're seeing mites, that means you should grab a kit and do a test, because they're high levels. And that's a bad time to have to make that decision when you absolutely need an intervention right away. It's good to be prepared, I believe.
Okay. Going to nutrition. Somebody's asking about, if not refined sugars, what nutrition does a colony need in order to survive through winter? You showed the slide with, honey on it, with pollen on it. The diversity of pollen, having different varieties of pollen is essential. But what's your suggestion there?
Mm-hmm. So I can only tell you what our bees need here in Minnesota. And so in Minnesota, we need 75 to 100 pounds of honey in our colony in order to get through our winter, because we have long periods potentially where they just we have very cold temperatures, so they need to have a lot of honey packed into that colony. So I suggest that's one of those questions where the management is very local, and it would be of bad form if I told you what your bees need in your area without knowing your area. And my expertise is it's for wintering is really good in Minnesota, but you probably don't need to go to the extremes that we go to here. And so I know that you do a lot of outreach or extension question answering also, Daniel. So contacting your beekeeping organization or your local bee experts or your bee clubs, it's a great way to get that information. But pollen is important, and I'll tell you when pollen is important. We know it's important when our bees just start to raise brood in the winter, which in our area is late January, February. So that's why we put a pollen patty on then. But when we're doing inspections right now, we're looking at those frames, and we expect to see a ring of honey and then a ring of pollen and then brood. And if I pull a frame up and I'm not seeing that pollen, then I'm doing a little bit digging deeper and making sure that I can find pollen in that colony, because I know that they're starting to raise winter bees, and when they do that, they need to have pollen accessible. You have to be careful about here not putting pollen in too late in the fall, so that you don't encourage too much brood rearing. But throughout the season, our management is to make sure that they have that protein.
Great, thank you. And just kind of one final question before we wrap up here. It goes back to your test kits and the way that you test. Somebody was asking about what about testing for nukes?
Oh,
sure. You just want to go into that.
Sure. Yeah, and actually, we've been preparing some videos, and actually one of them is just that nukes are just important to test as well as regular colonies. In fact, we went into our apiary here at the University of Minnesota, and I was really surprised to find out what our nuke mite levels were. They were much higher than I would have anticipated from the previous tests. So you actually need to monitor in those nukes also. And if you're managing a larger apiary, the rule of thumb, based on actually work that Katie Lee did here for her master's degree at the U of M, is that if you have like anything up to 8, you're looking at all 8 of those colonies for sampling. But in a bigger apiary, you should just sample 8 colonies. So if you have 30 colonies in an apiary, sample 8 and make your management decision based upon those samples. And the other rule of thumb is that we found, because mites can spread is that if you are finding mites in one colony, you really do need to manage that entire apiary, which is, it's a little different approach, but it turns out it's an effective way to keep your apiary healthy.
Thank you for that. So just to recap on everything, this is a recorded session, so please feel free to go to our YouTube channel. Once we're done here, you'll be able to view this so that you can pull off all of the necessary information from here, whether it be the resources with Rebecca's email or the Bee Squad's email, the information that she's presented. You can rewatch this webinar so that you can listen in a little bit more in detail and write down the information that was presented. And just to note that going back to that mite check kit, again, Rebecca mentioned that BrushymtnBeeFarm does sell it. We are having our summer sale that's happening through the end of September, at which point it is $16. So please jump on to BrushymtnBeeFarm, get your mite check kit. But more importantly, whether using the mite check kit or any other monitoring method, please go to mitecheck.com, key in the information so that we can use that data to better manage our hives. Rebecca, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. If anybody does have any further questions that they don't want to necessarily poll to the Bee Squad, you can reach out to BrushymtnBeeFarm, info@BrushymtnBeeFarm.com or 1-800-233-7929 or 1-800-Beeswax. We are there to help you out, and we'll answer the questions to the best that we can. So with that, Rebecca, thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you to the listening audience for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.